Welcome both. Very well coordinated to begin. Like angels come to us to talk about gut health. I'm going to start off by tapping into what I just mentioned there about instinct. We talk so much about maternal instinct, women's instinct. I'd love to know, is there a difference between men and women when it comes to that gut-brain connection, Tara?
Obviously, anecdotally, we do talk about women's intuition, but I'm a really big advocate of the fact that there are a lot less differences in the brains of men and women than we think. So, for example, if I asked you all to line up in this room, by height, it wouldn't be all the men on one side and all the women on the other. So there's an area of overlap. And things like women are good at multitasking can actually cause us problems. So I don't want to say men, can't hone their intuition through neuroplasticity just like we can.
It's almost like we put constraints on ourselves when we're too dogmatic about things. Rose, we were just talking backstage about the importance of nuance when we're discussing these things.
Yeah, I think, nuance is everything, and we like to think of extremes, and it's easier for us to think in extremes than absolutes. But when we're talking about our body, our brain, life, anything, there's so much in between, and nuance is really important. And also, I've been saying to everyone, because it's true, the brain finds it easier to think in extremes, and actually nuance is where it's more challenged, so that's where the brain has to work a bit harder.
Well, on the subject of the brain, Tara, the gut is often referred to as the second brain. Is this a phrase or a term that you are on board with? And if not, why is that?
I don't really like it.
That's okay.
Only because I think it's used to try to make the gut sound more important, and I don't think that's necessary, because I think, the more we learn about the gut, it's so intricate, it does so much more than we thought it did. People also say there are more nerves around the heart than any other organ, and then call that, the second or the third brain. So I just think each organ needs to be valued for itself and doesn't have to be compared to another one. Although obviously as a neuroscientist, I do say that the brain is the CEO of your body, and you can live without most of your gut, but you can't live without your brain.
And is that why people would say it's the second brain?
No, Rose told me why.
Why we call it the second
Because
brain?
they come from the same part of the neural tube unfolding.
What's really interesting is it's the same cells that create the brain and the gut. And in the fetus, they come from the same source, and then they divide off and create different tissue.
Right from the very beginning of our being, right from conception.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's called the second brain, but it's also it has got a lot of nerve endings in there too, but it doesn't, it's different for sure.
That layer in the fetus is called the neuroectoderm, so it's neuro, but the gut comes from that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to talk about the enteric nervous system. What is it actually made of, since we're getting granular with these cells from their very origins? And how does it work day to day for us?
So, there's two networks at play. You've got the myenteric plexus, which is sort of the muscle, and when you think about the colon, everyone knows it sort of does that shape. So that's the muscle, and it's in charge of muscle and motility. And then you have the submucosal plexus, which is in charge of enzyme bile production and enzyme production. So that's sort of more to do with absorption, the actual digestion and breakdown of food, depending on how your bile production is, stomach acid. So those are the two networks that are at play in the enteric nervous system.
So when we get a bad gut feeling, what does this reveal about the enteric nervous system?
Oh, I think the thing about bad gut feeling depends what that gut feeling is. Is your bad gut feeling nausea, like actual physical bad gut feeling, or is it just a feeling? Because something that is true is that the gut is really sensitive. And it's sensitive, and this messaging system, which I know we're going to talk lots about, but it's sending messages all the time to the brain, saying we're safe, we're not safe, something's really horribly going wrong. And that sort of gut feeling can be a reflection of stress, it can be food poisoning, it can be years of trauma. We know that childhood trauma actually makes those nerve endings in the gut more sensitive. So then it's a gut feeling can be a really strong reflection of what is going on around you, and you can genuinely feel it in the gut through things like nausea or diarrhea or any of those things, but just that feeling of unease.
Well, we will get into how we differentiate between whether it is food poisoning in our gut or whether it's trauma that we need to unpack.
Yeah.
But the idea that these feelings are held in our gut, we know that serotonin is the happy chemical, but around 90% of it is made in the gut. Tara, how does this impact our mental well-being?
Mm-hmm. So there are actually 600 million neurons in the enteric nervous system, and there are afferent and efferent pathways. So the brain and the gut are both talking to each other all the time in both directions. I think it's really important for us to say that what we used to call the gut-brain axis should actually now be known as the gut microbiome and brain triangle.
Right.
And they all talk to each other in like every single direction. And so the nerves in the gut wall are there for, as Rose mentioned, motility, so moving your food through the colon and then excreting it, for circulation, so absorbing the nutrients from the food, for secretions like the enzymes and things that Rose mentioned, and also for immunity. So those nerve cells are talking to immune cells in the gut area all the time as well, which is why the gut microbiome is so crucial to our immune system. And we're also producing several neurotransmitters. And so you mentioned serotonin, and it's a real neuro myth for me to talk about 90% of serotonin being produced in the gut, because that serotonin does not cross the blood-brain barrier. So it actually has no impact on mood, and it's much more to do with the absorption of nutrients and the constriction and dilatation of vessels in the gut.
Right.
We also produce dopamine, GABA, acetylcholine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline in the gut. And some of these have effects on fear and anxiety.
So the neurochemicals that produce in the gut that you just mentioned there, they can affect conditions like anxiety, like depression as well,
Yeah.
that we see a lot of today. How? And why might we see more of it than perhaps we used to? Or is that just a diagnostic?
Mm-hmm. So Rose mentioned that the brain and the gut talk to each other, and the gut says we're safe or we're not safe. So these neurochemicals are the ones that are excreted when we are in fear, in stress, in anxiety or depression. And I would say, yes, of course, we are better at diagnosing these things, but actually we have savaged our gut microbiome. So the diversity and quality of the bacteria, good bacteria in our guts, is much less than it was when we lived in the cave or prior to the agricultural revolution. And that's because of antibiotics, stress, alcohol, ultra-processed food, etc. So we all know, I think, everyone here knows about probiotics and prebiotics and fiber being important to the gut, but there are particular strains of gut bacteria that are ideal for mental health, and they are strains of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium.
We are always careful to differentiate between mental health, mental illness, mental well-being, but we should talk about food, supplementation. How can what we eat, what we put into our gut, affect our mental well-being? Because that is what we're here to talk about, a health experience.
Well, there's a very strong association with what we eat and mood. I mean, it's been shown in multiple studies that what we eat and how we eat can absolutely improve symptoms of things like depression. And I would say from my side, from a food side, so if you sort of break it down into different things and what they're doing, so if you're eating a diverse diet of fibre, lots of plants, everyone must have heard that about 3,000 times this weekend, but loads of plants, the thing that helps is that your microbiome then produces short-chain fatty acids, and in particular butyrate, which we know is really good for reducing inflammation, and particularly inflammation in the brain. I mean, it's good for inflammation all over the body, but it helps to modulate the immune system that Tara was talking about. And so that would be one thing. The other thing is good fats, so EPA and DHA, which are found in fish oils, or omega-3s, is really, really beneficial for brain health, but it's also just another one that's really good for inflammation, helps to bring inflammation down. I mean, you can't talk about what we eat without talking about what we actually do eat, which is most people eat mostly ultra-processed foods. And those foods are associated with multiple. I think if you think about the gut and the gut-brain, and you can't also ignore the gut barrier. So eating a high amount of ultra-processed foods interrupts the gut barrier. So do lots of things. But that gut barrier is one cell thick. And when that becomes more permeable, what people call leaky gut, you get these lipopolysaccharides, endotoxins, which hit the bloodstream. These LPS can cross the blood-brain barrier. They hit the microglial, which is their brain immune system, and create inflammation. And this could show up as things like brain fog, depression, fatigue, just generally feeling a bit meh. So I think what you're eating and what you should eat and what you perhaps should pull back on can have a really profound impact. And I think I've been in nutrition a long time, and I think that people are like, yeah, nutrition. It's so crucial.
So fundamental.
It's so fundamental.
We keep coming back to these basics all weekend. What we put in, it sounds so simple, but...
No one does it. I see loads of people. No one does it. Well, actually, that's not true, but But it's really, really, when it comes to our mood and our emotional sort of mental state, it's absolutely key. Do you find that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you felt the difference in your own lifetime, in your own work on yourself, when eating better, the effect that it's had on your mental well-being?
Well, I think the thing about eating better, actually, and I should have said, the other problem with eating ultra-processed foods, and this is when I'm eating ultra-processed foods, because I'm not no angel, and I'm a human being, and sometimes I eat a bag of Doritos, awesome. But when I eat high sugary, high fatty ultra-processed foods, I start snacking more, and then I notice my energy goes, because it's quite inflammatory. Those foods create glucose and insulin spikes. They create glucose instability. That creates stress. Look, I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but if you're asking what I feel when I'm not eating regularly, when I'm eating less than perfectly, or actually I don't ever eat perfectly, but when I'm eating sort of more fast food, then I'll notice that change.
And do you feel like it snowballs?
Well, yeah, the problem when you start eating, I don't know how you find it, but when I start eating sugar, a little bit of, and I definitely do on a daily basis have something every day. But if I have, if I start on the sort of, Easter's a great time. Celebrations come out, you start eating all that really high sugary chocolate, which is really good. But then you notice that it does snowball because you are triggering that glucose spike, and then you're dropping it, and your body over deals with the sugar. So you get this, and then you get this low glucose, and then your brain is going, hang on a sec, guys, we need sugar. And so that's when those cravings can start kicking in on that cycle. That's what like a glucose roller coaster usually stems from.
That's the Easter story, and then he has risen. If someone is really struggling with their low mood or anxiety, where should we go for the intervention first? Should it be gut focused? Should it be brain focused? Is it not a case of versus? Is it a case of a holistic tackling of both together?
So it's quite hard to directly access your brain, and because we don't see our brain, we don't think about it a lot of the time. I believe that the gut is the gateway to the brain. And all the things that we know that we should do for general health, like sleep well, and I can go into details, but sleep well, exercise, eat well, be hydrated, manage your stress, do some mindfulness. All of those things have exactly the same effects on your gut bacteria as they do on your serotonin receptors or other receptors in the brain that regulate your mood. So when I have patients or clients with brain fog, for example, the first thing I will do is get them to keep a food diary, introduce some fermented foods, maybe some probiotics, eat the rainbow, a variety of 30 different plant products a week, which isn't as hard as it may sound, because coffee counts, all spices count, pepper counts.
Okay.
And different colours of the same vegetable, so yellow tomato, red tomatoes too. Start with that and with hydration, and then build up to things like maybe restricting the time window that people eat in. Rose would know more about that than me. So all of those basic things, again, like you've said, that keeps coming up.
And you mentioned probiotics there. the research linking microbiome diversity to depression, anxiety, chronic stress, it's growing very fast. How strong is all that evidence, and where are the gaps in it?
Yeah, so I think the evidence for mental illness and mental health and your diversity and quality of gut bacteria and potentially the use of probiotics is pretty strong now. So there's something called dysbiosis, which is where the quality and diversity of the gut bacteria is not as ideal as it should be. And depending on which strains are missing, this could relate to depression, it could relate to insomnia, it could relate to anxiety. But what I think is really exciting as a neuroscientist is the research that's growing now that's showing the connection between dysbiosis and Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's, so more neurological diseases. So that's really broadening, what we are trying to understand and the potential benefits of probiotics on diseases that are, huge crises for our aging populations.
And Rose, do you find the research that's been done compelling enough?
What, for probiotics?
Yeah.
I think probiotics are really useful in certain situations. I think, actually, as Tara said, I think you're going to see a huge shift in probiotics in the not too distant future. There are things now like the shotgun metagenomics tests, which are looking at thousands of different bacteria, different strains that don't even have names. They've just got numbers. And I think when we come to learning more about those and working out how to deliver those, it can become much more personalized. I think I use probiotics all the time in clinic. I think they can be really useful. I do think that diversity of food, as Tara said, is actually, it's accessible. It's not as, once you get into the rhythm of it, and you don't have to count your plants, but, just always adding things in. I think that's something, sprinkle some seeds, add some spice, add some herbs to your salad. It doesn't have to be difficult, but the data around that is compelling as well, so I think that's most accessible to people. I think probably lots of people, they don't know what probiotic. If you're sort of fine, I think a probiotic can be misplaced in lieu of doing that foundation, which I think is absolutely key.
Is it important to keep changing up your probiotics so you don't end up with a lack of diversity because you've gone too hard on certain bacteria? I mean,
the thing is, when you think about the diversity of strains that exist in us, probiotics can't hit them because we only have about 12. The strains that you'll find in a probiotic are very, very limited compared to the strains that you find inside your gut. And that's why we keep coming back to diversity. Eat the fiber. Ferments can be really useful because they feed your gut. They feed your bacterial colony or microbial colony. And the thing when we're looking at ultra-processed foods, lots of things can disrupt your colony. So stress is a major one. Ultra-processed foods, terrible for your gut because that feeds the less desirable bacteria. That's why we talk about it in such negative terms when it comes to the gut. Antibiotics, lack of sleep, there's so many things, but just by nurturing it daily from what you eat, I feel like it's an easy win.
And as a result of not nurturing it, when the microbiome isn't adequately fed, what signals does it send upwards, and how does that show up on our bodies? How does it show up on the outside? Also.
You answer? I'll answer. What was the question?
I was so distracted by Simon, and I thought the question was for you, but I think
I can answer the question. It's fine. What does it send when the microbiome is distracted, like us?
When it's not adequately fed?
Yeah.
How does it show up on the body? What signals should we be looking out for?
Well, the obvious things are digestive symptoms. The less obvious things that I've had people come to me saying they have arthritis, or that one person felt like they were tipping on narcolepsy because they could not stay awake. Some people come with headaches, and very common, but often those are actually effects of an inflamed body from a gut and a gut microbiome that are not particularly happy. And then obviously you have the obvious symptoms like IBS type symptoms, but and then mood.
Would you say, like, in your clinic, because what I think is when I look at someone, I can tell from their skin how good their diet is. I believe that your diet really shows up on your skin.
That's true.
And that's not just a sort of like a holistic kind of beauty well-being statement. It's because your skin is your largest organ, and so and it's obviously the boundary of your body. So your hydration and your nutrition are going to go to your skin last. So if your skin and your hair and your nails are naturally good, then that probably means that all of your organs are getting like the right levels of nutrition and hydration.
Yeah.
And also, there's a field of study called psychodermatology, which is about the connection between your mental state and your skin. And it's also a two-way connection. So, if you get a terrible breakout or you have an itch that you can't cure. I mean, I've had a patient commit suicide because of an itch that couldn't be treated. Wow. So if you've got a skin issue, or you look in the mirror and it makes you feel less good about yourself, obviously that has a knock-on effect on your mood. But if you've got anxiety or stress or depression, or you're going through a crisis, like that can show up as a breakout of eczema or dermatitis or shingles. So it's all so connected. All of those things are so connected to the immune system as well. And that's what's so exciting about us being alive at this time of the world, that we're understanding that intrinsic connection so much, at the same time as understanding, and I love this, the ethos of health, how important human connection is to that. So there's one fact that I wanted to share today, my favourite one. Be careful who you're snogging, because you can actually donate immune cells and gut bacteria cells to someone that you exchange bodily fluids with, or share crockery, cutlery, towels, your bed with. So Tim Spector actually said to me, be careful who you marry, because you might be donating your good bacteria to this other person. Now, of course, at the time he didn't know, but I was shielding my husband, who was immunocompromised. And I remember thinking, well, I don't mind giving some of my, good immunity to my husband. So worth thinking about, when you're choosing who to date.
And to go the other way as well, because we talk about this axis, or moreover this triangle, what effect does stress then in turn have on the gut? We live in a stressful world. Rose.
Well, stress, I think this is one of the favourite things I say to clients, because you can see the penny dropping when they understand that you can't do both. You can't digest, you can't be in a parasympathetic and a sympathetic at the same time. Our bodies are not designed, we don't have enough blood supply. So if you're in a sympathetic state, your blood supply is going to your brain so you can think fast, it's going to your limbs so that you can move fast. It's not going to your digestion. It also, when you're very stressed, your enzymatic production in the gut is reduced, your bile production is reduced. So your general ability to digest, break down, absorb food is really impaired. In the same way that when you are in your rest and digest, your parasympathetic, happy days, that's when it can do its job efficiently. But I mean, how many people eat? Well, I do this, but how many people eat while they're in the car, eat while they're on their phones, they're trying to do emails, they're rushing. And it's really basic things like having a breath before you eat, sit down, chew your food. All those things can make a huge, huge difference. Because, and also when you think about looking at food, smelling food, preparing food, that's your body starts, I think 25% of enzymes are produced in the anticipation of food. So if there's no anticipation and you're not even taking a moment to chew your food, appreciate it, the digestion is really working uphill. You're not helping it at all.
And really engaging with those other senses. I mean, you just have to look down the street on your way in and how many fast food places there are, how many coffee shops where you're getting your lunch to go. We're not allowing ourselves the space or the grace to get into rest and digest at all. Society's not set up for it. And so what can we be doing, Tara, to ensure that we give our body that chance?
Here I really like to look back to ancient wisdom, because there are so many things that are not new things that we need to learn, but just things that we need to remember. So because I was brought up in an Indian Hindu household, there was a rule that was so strict that it must be like so embedded in my brain that I still do it now naturally without even thinking, which is that you had to stop and you had to thank God for your food before you took the first mouthful. And so sometimes I'm with people and I see that fork go straight in, and I sort of think, oh, I'm having that moment because it's
God,
so...
have I done that?
Yeah, and then, sort of, one of my Italian friends said to me once, English people eat their lunch walking to the bus stop. And I thought it's so true. I mean, from my culture as well, I would just never do that. So I think what you've said about how society is set up is true, but I try to eat at home, like food that I've cooked from scratch myself at least once a day. So if I'm going out for dinner, I'll make sure I eat lunch at home, kind of thing. And so, the things that you set up at home, like your whole environment, like what's your dining room like? Are electrical, like phones and TVs allowed in your dining room? Do you sit on the sofa and eat your dinner when you're watching TV? These are like small things that people can really tweak, and I think you would actually feel and notice the difference.
And it's interesting because it comes back to community again, eating with people, with friends, with family around the table, taking that time for it to be almost ritualistic, ceremonial. You're going to feel better. Yeah. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. We talk about IBS, bloating, irregular digestion, and we often write them off as food intolerances, but we've just talked about stress there. Could they be symptoms, Rose, of something a little more systematic or systemic?
Like stress related?
Yes.
Well, I think if you think about what we were just saying about not sitting down and not hitting that parasympathetic state, so if you're very sympathetic dominant, which I would say the majority of people are nowadays, we are on the go from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed. For many of us, we're attached to, it's just, there are very few boundaries around protecting when we eat or just giving ourselves time out. I think people's work-life balances are usually quite skewed. So when you think about that, if you think about the fact that you're eating in a rush, you're possibly not digesting properly, then that in itself will create things like bloating. And also if you're not getting, if from a biological point of view, if you're not producing enough digestive enzymes, so you don't have enough, for want of a better term, fire in your gut, then they pass through, are not as digested as well digested as they should have, and then they can pass into the large colon, the large intestine, and they don't break down as well. They don't ferment as they should. Some proteins will putrefy. I know it's a horrible word, but that's what happens. Rather than it fermenting carbohydrate, your colon is dealing with undigested proteins, and all of that can create lots of digestive symptoms. And even just rushing your food. I mean, it is just a mechanical, it has not had the time to do its job.
Can I just add that I think like some of the stuff we talked about, the beautiful rituals and things, can sound like a nice to have, but you literally do not, if you eat the same meal when you're stressed, and then you eat it the next day when you've done, some breath work or mindfulness, you will absorb more nutrients from that. You cannot even absorb the same nutrients from the same meal if you're in a stressed state. And that goes along with research around things like, obviously people think it's better to drink a diet drink than a sugary drink, but if you drink a diet drink, then the gut bacteria will pick up more calories from other food to make up for that sugar deficit. So there's like lots of interesting things like that. The other one I really like sharing with people is that when you have cravings, especially if it's for something that's not good for you, sometimes you crave cheese because you need salt, or nuts because you need magnesium or whatever. But let's say it's a sugar craving. Think of a little gremlin in your gut that is a mutating bacteria that's trying to survive and is using you as an avatar to get what it needs, but then you're going to get the knock-on consequences of eating that bad stuff.
This idea that our body can get in its own way, that the mindset, even when we eat, can affect the absorption. It does, it keeps coming up when we're talking about all sorts of different parts of our well-being this weekend. So I do want to go back actually to gut feelings. Neurologically speaking, Tara, what are they, and what is the science behind instinct and intuition?
So, thank you. That's one of my favourite questions. I think in the sort of 5 years between writing The Source and The Signs, I went very much from believing fully that intuition and gut instinct were only held in neurons and were a fully mental process. What we've understood now with all the amazing research on PTSD and the importance of fascia, the connective tissue that holds all of our organs together, is that gut instinct, again, the ancient people obviously realized it was physical more than, we have until recently, is very much a combination of physical and mental factors. And even I, when I was doing research for The Signs, was struggling to get my head around that a bit. And then I thought, put your hands up if, have you ever had a visceral reaction to something like a shiver running down your spine when you've had bad news, or butterflies in your stomach when you're anxious, or goosebumps when you feel like a strong emotion or intuition? So I would say raise your hands if you have. Yeah, I mean, so everyone has felt it.
Yeah.
or most people. And I think, the people that didn't raise their hands, maybe if you now start to notice it or you look back, you might find an example of that. So the question really starts with, what do those things mean? And of course, that's down to our interpretation. And so, I've always said that journaling, those sort of, dreams, bodily sensations, like, things that come to your mind that, in decision making is really important in terms of honing that skill. But it's a huge skill that we already have, but it's going to become probably the most important human skill as we, watch the rise of AI.
And why is that? So that we can battle it or work with it?
So obviously, as a scientist, I'm not into battling it at all, but I'm very much into using it as a helpful tool. But also understanding that it is only going to get informed by us, and so our biases, our creativity, our intellect, and our intuition can help to shape this in the best way for humanity. Otherwise, there are obviously very big existential questions about the future of humanity.
Because if it's just learning from the internet, we're a bit screwed. The vagus nerve actually comes up quite often in this conversation. Rose, what is it doing, and why is its tone so critical to that gut-brain relationship?
So the vagus nerve is the connection, it connects the several organs, lungs, liver, gut, to the brain. And so it's reading its environment the whole time. It's reading the environment of the internal organs all the time. And with that information, depending what it's picking up, it sends messages to the brain. And then the brain either releases things like cortisol, or cortico-releasing hormone, which then releases cortisol and adrenaline from the adrenals. So it's giving feedback to the brain, and then the brain responds and reacts. So keeping the vagus nerve, or what we call vagal tone, calm or just happy, is really important for the whole system. And it is not just about, I think when people think about inflammation, actually that's not true. I was going to say, inflammation when you cut yourself and you get and it's sore, we need that kind of inflammation. But if we're it's hard to, when we talk about inflammation, we talk about it systemically, and it's hard to know unless you do have something like psoriasis or you have an eczema breakout. So if you've got good vagal tone, your inflammation will be better. In theory, your stress response will be calmer, your microbiome will be happier, your digestion will work better. It's a really good sign. I mean, for lots of people, I don't know if lots of people know this, but your HRV that everybody's so obsessed about, it's the sort of more crude measurement of your vagal tone. It's telling you what your vagal tone's doing. So when I've just had so many people talk about HRV this weekend, and that's what it's showing you. So when you get a great HRV score, it's probably because you've had a more relaxed or a more balanced day, I would imagine.
And Tara, how do we improve our vagal tone?
So it's quite interesting because there are obviously quite a few devices now that you can use to do it, like I think NeuroSim are here, and there's one called Pulsetto and a few other ones. What I found with all of them, I don't use them myself because I prefer natural methods, but with people that are in such a bad place that they need something to kickstart that process, that these devices make a difference, but only if you are doing the other things, like sleeping long enough and deeply enough, spending time in nature, doing some kind of breath work or meditation, connecting with people that make you feel happy. All of those things are free and easy ways to put you into a parasympathetic state, which is when your vagal tone is good. So yeah, I would say, yes, there are devices, and I think some of them have, really good studies behind them, but all the natural, free, and easy ways are actually the best ways to do that.
Which are?
Spending time in nature, breath work, meditation, sleeping, and spending time with people that you love that make you feel relaxed.
Can I say what's mental about the world we live in now? Because those things all sound so nice,
right?
But people struggle to do them, don't they? And it's and I think that, I find that people don't think they're going to make a difference because they're so basic, but I think people really have forgotten how to just sit and have a conversation or go for a walk. So then they have to get it. I mean, I'm not, I have lots of devices for all sorts of things, but it's sort of like those basic things that really are impactful, but I don't think people trust it anymore.
Yeah, and also not to multitask. So I often say to people, if you're going for a walk in nature, don't listen to a podcast at the same time. Just do the walk in nature. I know for myself that spending time with people, that I have really good resonance with, that's the biggest thing that changes my, the state of my nervous system. Listening to relaxing music can help. But I was going to say something you were saying, because they're so basic that people don't do them. It'll come back to me.
But it's so underestimated and so important.
Yeah.
You spoke so beautifully, Tara, about the importance of our instincts and our intuition. So let's talk about listening to our instincts and our intuition. Rose, most of us have been taught at some point to push through. You push through physical discomfort, or you're scared of doing that, do it anyway. And that can be positive. It can help us strive and aspire to our goals. But what are the long-term consequences of chronically overriding what the body is trying to say?
Well, I think there's two things. So the push through, if it's, we talk a lot about hermetic stress in my world, which is applying a bit of pressure or stress to you or discomfort in order for the body to become more resilient. And it is really beneficial. We live in a very comfortable world. We have central heating. Nothing's very challenging. So you actually have to now create a bit of a challenge. For many of us, it's useful to create a bit of a challenge, like cold water. Doesn't have to be freezing cold. A cold shower will do, or a HIIT class, or a bit of an intermittent fast. And by doing that, the body's like, oh, hang on a second, this is a bit challenging, and it has to rally. So often that can be really helpful, but this is where the nuance is. If you are extraordinarily stressed, adding to that stress is not going to be helpful. So that I think the world that we live and work in is it's such broad brush strokes, and people jump onto different bandwagons and they're not listening to what their body is telling them. And I feel like that comes from lack of confidence. It's like we've lost the confidence to listen to our body and hear what it's trying to tell us. And you don't have to be a functional medicine practitioner to understand that something's not right in my gut. When I ate that, it didn't feel so good. Last night I didn't sleep so well, so I'm going to take it easy. There are lots of I just feel like we've lost that conversation because we're so used to being told, and that might be actually down to Western medicine as well, not anything negative about Western medicine, but we're very used to going to the doctor to get to, rather than sort of knowing our bodies really well. And I think that's one of the things I use in clinic a lot with my clients is write it down. Write down how you feel when you eat that. Write down how you felt, when you did have a weekend walking in nature, so that you get an idea. You start to learn about yourself. You are your North Star, and you need to know what works for you and what doesn't.
And how does that sit with you, Tara, when you're doing your job, you're doing your work, but you also know the importance of those instincts and listening to them? Yeah,
so I'm probably going to take a slightly harder line than Rose and say that the consequence of the question that you asked her is burnout. If you don't listen to your body for long enough, it's going to break. But interestingly, there's research that shows that nurses who are giving cancer diagnoses to patients, they don't go into a sympathetic state because they have purpose in what they're doing and they're trying to do it in the kindest and best way possible. So I think that this risk of burnout is very much balanced by sense of purpose, and not just a purpose that serves yourself, but a purpose that transcends yourself. That can take us a long way to work on a tank that's not completely full, but we must remember that there's a point where you have to stop, you have to rest, you have to recoup your resilience, and that's going to be better long term than pushing through.
And where do we feel that the biggest risks and opportunities as well lie in the well-being industry? So moving slightly away from medicine, when it comes to listening to our bodies, is the future bright?
I think it, I believe in humanity, so I think it is, but I think we have swung so far on the pendulum towards outsourcing our responsibility for ourselves. So we're over-measuring, it's possibly not always correct, and it might be stressing us out, and we will lose the art of listening to our own body. So, Rose said you don't have to be a functional medicine expert, or you don't have to be a doctor to listen to your own body, but it probably helps.
Yeah.
And so, if you know the physiology of the inside, it's easier to understand what certain things mean. So I have never taken a food intolerance test in my life, because I can tell from whether my lips tingle or I get bloated or, whatever it is, that something's probably not right for me. So I believe that we are going to return to this sort of sense of trusting ourselves, being able to rely on our instincts, being able to read our own bodies, despite this rise of technology that personally I feel has gone like a little bit too far in terms of well-being, because it's no longer well-being if there's a device stuck to you all the time or a device in your bedroom.
It's not living well.
I don't think it's like living.
Do you
agree?
agree?
I do, because I think it's obsessive, and then it becomes rigid, and then rigidity tends to lead to restrictive behaviours, none of which is about balance or well-being, and I was talking to someone this morning about this no drinking culture, and that to me, I was a really good drinker, but I don't drink so much anymore because it doesn't work for me anymore, actually. But I think that idea of placing rigidity and rules, they tend to come from places of fear. People get scared, so then they become very rigid, then they restrict. And I agree with everything Tara said, because I just think it's actually about breathing. When I think about breathing, I think of like expanding and relaxing, and just the words being present is really really important, and I find it very difficult to do. I know many of my clients do too.
Well, these absolute rules, they don't really serve us, because we are all different, and they don't take that into account. We also have this trend of maxing. When it comes to food and supplementation, the things going into our body that are supposed to be nourishing our gut health, in a world filled with diet fads and maxing trends and supplement hype, how do we cut through and do what's right for us? And what are the dangers of being too absolute with it?
Well, I think, I don't know, because it's really not sexy, my answer. It's really boring, but it's just like, it's really not rocket science. It's like, eat half a plate of plants, eat some protein, have a bit of complex carbohydrate. It's really, really simple. I mean, there are people who have, obviously, symptoms or illnesses that need specific interventions. But for anybody who's doing all right, then if you started eating 3 meals a day, you had 12 to 14 hours of fasting overnight, that just means going to sleep and not eating too close to bedtime, and you eat just a really well-balanced plate, you would notice the difference. The food noise quietens, you're feeding your microbiome, it's happier, it's sending signals through the vagal nerve to be that everything's calm and all good. It's really not rocket science.
And just to touch on what you said there about when it is a little more serious, when there's something more encoded in the gut, we know that the body holds emotional memory, stress, trauma, moreover, even bad food experiences. How can we work to reverse those? And how do we recognize that might have happened, might be there?
Well, again, I think this goes back to what Tara is saying, and what we're saying about knowing your system and listening to your body. So don't ignore. I mean, people ignore all sorts of signals. They will ignore. This is one thing that I really have noticed, is that people live with a lot of pain. Some people, they live with joint pain for years and they think it's normal. People will live talking about bowel movements. They will ignore the signal to go to the loo long enough, and then their bowel movement really slows down, because it's like, well, no one's listening to us. We're not going to keep moving. So you ignore those signals and you don't sort of investigate them, or support them to improve, then they're not going to improve. And I would say that if you are really worried, then it probably is worth finding a practitioner or a doctor and going to get to the bottom of it, rather than living with it for 5, 10, 15 years.
We get so used to how our bodies feel. Sometimes it's hard to know that there was anything ever to work on. So if anyone is in a position like that, Tara, what would you say to them?
Well, I mean, we've been talking over the last couple of days about, you've had to get used to being tired all the time. And
really tired.
That could be because you're a new mum. I remember as a junior doctor, I was tired all the time, and I had the choice of, do I just go to work and sleep, or do I still want to be social and you know, spend time with...
And fill your cup in that way.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of the diet thing, obviously, you know, you've said all the right things to do on your plate, but I would add, harder to say to the general population, but to this community, obviously keep informed, but also look at who you're eating with. Because who you eat with changes a lot what you eat. And so, you know, for example, if I suggested to Jamie that we go for a McDonald's, he's like 99% likely to say no. He's saying yes now. So I think that's, you know, I think if my friends saw me starting to eat badly, they would say something.
Yeah, that's true. But also, I think there's data supporting that you absorb and break down food differently when you are eating with people, you know, that you want to be with, and you're having a nice time.
Here's to eating with good friends, good people. I'm going to open the floor now to questions from... that was the fastest hand I've seen go up. Can we bring a mic over here, please? We've got about 15 minutes, so we'll hopefully get through lots. And if you could keep your questions quite precise, it means that Tara and Rose can answer them and we can get through as many as possible.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. Dr. Tara, this might be for you or also for you. So when we talk about neuroscience, but also talking about psychology, sorry, I was quick with my hand, but I wasn't quick to be precise with my words. We also talked about eating healthy and making these right choices, not rocket science. So going back to the neuroscience and psychology, are there, if any, talks on the identity of like, I am a healthy person, therefore I eat healthy, versus I inherently believe that I'm not a healthy person, therefore it's easier for me to do fast food and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So I think the question was, you know, does your mindset alter your food habits? And I think the answer to that would be absolutely yes. So the things that you believe about yourself, whether they're conscious or not, are absolutely driving your behaviors. So, you know, I would say probably the solution to that is to create an affirmation that is around deserving to nourish your body and for that to show up, you know, in your life, on your face, and then maybe make different food choices based on that.
And we all deserve to nourish our bodies.
Yeah, and I think in intention, there's been lots of studies, like crazy studies about intention, where, you know, around exercise mostly, where muscle mass, with the attention. So, you know, our brain is really powerful. We don't really, I mean, you know, we only know a little bit of what our brain is capable of. So intention, I would say, is really important.
Question over... Oh, actually, well, you're a bit closer to here, and then we can go around.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Tara. And you mentioned about the importance of social life to support well-being and our life choices. But I would like to hear from you the importance of solitude and silence to support and make us more aware of our instincts.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, and my personal and professional life are very intertwined, obviously, which I feel very grateful for, need to and like to spend quite a lot of time alone, particularly if I'm in nature. And so I do think solitude is important, but I think we have a loneliness crisis, and that's why I focus more on talking about community and belonging. And if I had to categorize, you know, like the top 10 things for neuroscience, then community and belonging would be my number one. But some time in solitude, in reflection, in prayer, in journaling, etc., would also be on the list.
Yeah, there's great power in solitude, but there's a difference between that and loneliness.
Yeah.
This hand over here, this gentleman has been...
His hand is on that side.
Oh, and on this side as well. And I must look this way. We'll go here next.
Hi, a fascinating talk, and thank you very much. I had two sort of questions. First being, would you say that if you were to know someone coming from sort of mixed heritage, I'm wondering if there's a connection and if I should tailor my diet to both my gut microbiome but also my genetics if I had that information? And secondly, if you think in the future we'll be able to timestamp our bacteria, sort of like geodating or carbon dating, to see if there has been traumas or like when you've taken antibiotics based on your bacterial makeup.
Okay. To answer. Yeah, shall I answer? Okay, so to answer your first question, your microbiome is very much created wherever you are. It's quite geographically located, so where you're born tends to impact your very first parts of your bacteria, literally where you are. So that could have an impact on what foods. I mean, my answer actually to your first part of your question is, what food do you like and what food likes you? When you're eating it, what food brings you joy? And how does it feel when you eat it? But if we're thinking about the microbes, your microbiome tends to be influenced by whereabouts you were born, how you were born, all those things. In the first 3 years of life, that's really crucial for microbiome. And do you want to do the second question?
Rose and I love a good debate, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
So I have heard, but correct me if I'm wrong, that depending on where your ethnicity comes from, that so for example, my ethnicity comes from a country where coconut trees grow.
Right.
So coconut products are probably good for my microbiome and probably not great for yours, for example.
Yeah.
And so I actually consciously try to eat more Indian spices than I would naturally easily cook, because I feel like that's probably better for my microbiome.
Yeah.
Do you?
Well, there have been twin studies done, and it's when they're geographically separate for whatever reason, or whenever you look, it's definitely a lot of influence of where you are in your first 3 years of life. But the genetic coding from your parents would definitely, and also the epigenetics of your parents when you are in utero. So what they're doing, what they're eating, all of those things will impact. So I would imagine it's a combination of both.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of...
Also the culture you grow up into.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of going into your second question, and I'm just going to pick up on that epigenetic thing. So the bigger studies are the Dutch famine and the Holocaust. And so we know that the stress state or starvation state that your parents were in at the time of conception or just prior, both sperm and egg, has a knock-on effect on your stress levels and perhaps your obesity tendencies or eating disorder tendencies as well. So I think if we turn that around, then I would answer your second question by saying I would love to think that something like a stool sample could give us information about previous trauma, not just genetic but epigenetic as well.
I mean, there are these new stool tests that it'll be a few years but they are looking at the genome they're looking at the DNA of all these strains. They're looking at them at the moment to see whether or not they are good if you should be eating more fat or if you're good at digesting. But that information they will have so much information from that. So then they would probably be able to see what has influenced your microbiome, and they're definitely looking at what that DNA shows in terms of what will influence your microbiome in a positive or negative way. So that would be really interesting.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come to this side of the room first. There's a gentleman here.
Hi there. You obviously talk about both brain and the gut talking both ways to each other. And if you like doing public speaking, I guess, or an exam, we've all felt, as you say, that butterflies in your stomach. But is there a way of knowing which way it's going? So in other words, if you're anxious like that, the brain's telling the gut, or because of the adrenaline, I might get a dodgy stomach. But how do you know if it's not the other way? That sometimes you might be anxious, but actually that's just caused because you haven't got enough gut bacteria, or is it because your brain's telling you, actually, there is a situation here that you need to be in fight or flight, and that's why you get the dodgy stomach. So in other words, how do you know which one's causing the anxiety, I guess, or the upset stomach?
That's a really good question. Well, I mean, my thinking about anxiety, I'm going to ask Tara too now. My thinking about anxiety is it's something that you wake up where it's not so tangible. Whereas when say you've got butterflies about doing a talk, then you know what it is. But sort of that when you're just anxious, which might be because of a microbiome dysbiosis, is sort of ongoing, but you can't pin it on anything. That was really, really professionally executed.
I mean, I think the answer to that question really is that you don't know, but it doesn't matter, and both of them are going on at the same time all the time. Like, if I sat here and spoke to Rose for half an hour and she never spoke, it's not the same as us having a conversation, and the brain-gut axis is a conversation.
Yeah, true.
Thank you very much.
a lady at the front here we'll come to.
Hi, thank you for that. That was absolutely fascinating and everything I think we all hoped it would be. But this is a question for Tara. It's around stimulation and overstimulation, and I don't know if it's just me or kind of like working full-time, being perimenopausal, looking after kind of teenagers and things like that, but I find the world very stimulating, as I'm sure we kind of all do. And the more like you turn on Netflix, you can watch anything, you can eat anything, you can literally do anything. Is there something about how stimulated we are and then the stimulation that is kind of going on in our microbiome? And I wouldn't call it stress, but just like there's just so much of everything. What does that do to our microbiome?
I was actually just about to say, well, it's stress, isn't it? So I think it's different words, like perhaps for the same thing. But being overstimulated all the time will mean that you're in a sympathetic state. And so personally, I think for what you've just described, that breath work is probably like the best place to start to try to help with that. But also that if you live in an overstimulated way and then you spend half an hour a day meditating or doing breath work, that's not really as good as what I would call introducing a patchwork quilt of mindfulness into your life. So, you know, that moment to savor your cup of tea or coffee in the morning, that, you know, time, like lovely eye contact with your children or another loved one, you know, making sure that you do go for that little walk in nature if you can, noticing your breath and slowing it down and focusing on the exhale, but throughout the day.
It does feel sometimes like social media or screens, our phones, they can have an impact on that gut-brain axis.
They really do.
They really do, yeah. They do. Which it feels incongruous, but not at all, actually.
No, they absolutely do have an impact on it.
Do we have more questions? One at the front here.
Thank you. My peak of interest is around the trauma relationship with gut function and also brain function. And I suppose I'm wondering, additional to what you've both shared, if you were presented with a client or a cohort of clients who identify that they've had early childhood trauma, for example, and they also know that they have a huge amount systemically that they're already working quite hard to support themselves with, is there anything additional that you would suggest for people that are navigating that kind of context? The connection and the safety and all of those things are beautiful, but give me your golden insights.
You want me to go?
Well, yeah, I mean, something that we haven't spoken much about is the gut barrier. I know we mentioned it earlier, but from a physiological point of view, I would be thinking about that, because we've talked a lot about diversity, which supports the microbes, but how's the barrier? And the thing is that when you have trauma, sensitivity of the gut is affected. And so I mean, we've talked about all of it, but the thing that I would mention in there is definitely barrier support. So, I mean, and from things like glutamine are really good for that. I mean, there's lots of things, slippery elm can be really good for that, but without knowing anything about, you know, the case, but I would think that would be somewhere that I would start, because once that's damaged, it's damaged for lots of people, but, you know, if you've never done any active work on it, it might remain that way no matter what else you do.
If I'm allowed to go rogue, because this isn't a gut or a brain thing particularly, then Andrew Hooverman referred to Bessel van der Kolk's book yesterday, The Body Keeps the Score. So the research now on how much fascia holds trauma means that doing something, a somatic therapy, so a therapy or an activity that is to do with the body, like dance, yoga, art therapy, massage, craniosacral therapy, or even using like ancient instruments that cause vibration, which helps to release nitric oxide in the body, and it contributes to your bone density, but it also allows you to like shake and release trauma from your tissues and your muscles. So that's kind of my latest thing that, yeah, I'm into.
We've got just under 2 minutes of time for one more question, and this hand here was straight up, yeah.
Thank you so much. I have a question on fasting because I heard many different messages. Some experts say that fasting for women is not good. Other people say that fasting is really good. So can you please say something more about fasting, especially for women? And also how we can combine fasting with social life, because many times I feel stressed because I have a dinner with friends and I say, oh, this is not under my eating window, or can you say something more about fasting?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like that's sort of, what do I have to say? I think it's like a full circle actually to how we started, which is if you lined up men and women, their height, they wouldn't all be in a line. So this idea that some things aren't good for women, you know, it drives me a little bit crazy because I feel like it's the same with cold plunging. It can be really beneficial for women, and let me be direct. Intermittent fasting can be really useful for everybody. It's very helpful for our microbiome. Again, more is not better. So fasting for 23 hours and having an hour eating window, no, that's not what we mean. What we're trying to achieve when we fast is not a reduction in calories. That is really, really important. We are trying